My wife just bought a dog while I was away, despite me repeatedly telling her not to. Kids seem to always have all kinds of unrealistic and downright impossible wishes, and my daughter Emma was the same. However, her kind of wish wasn't that unrealistic or impossible if you think about it, because her wish was to get a dog. It's very tough to tell your 10-year-old only child that you can't buy the one thing they really want. And the worst part was, she had been wanting a dog ever since I could remember. When it came to our family, I was always the bad cop who had to make difficult choices around the house, while my good cop wife was the one who comforted Emma whenever that happened. I didn't like the fact that I was seen by my daughter as this strict and stern dad, but it is what it is. Anyway, as I've mentioned, ever since I could remember, Emma had always wanted a dog. For every single birthday, she would tell us not to buy her gifts or hold a birthday party for her. She wanted none of that. She would tell us to put all that money toward buying a dog. Here's the thing, I grew up with dogs. I love dogs just like any other pet-loving person. But, as much as I love dogs, I know that they are a huge responsibility. From buying good quality dog food, to the never-ending purchase of toys because they go through them so fast, dogs can be very costly. And not to mention, their vet bills can rack up pretty quickly. I wish I could tell you that I could afford all of that just for the sake of my daughter, but I unfortunately couldn't. I own my business, a small technology repair shop in a major US city. What I make from my repair shop is enough to put food on the table, keep a roof above our heads, and pay the bills and mortgage and just that. My wife, Jen, is a teacher, and the money that she brings in helps us stay afloat. However, we have never been able to afford extra luxuries like going on vacations, and certainly not adding a family pet to the mix, which would drain my savings very fast. So, whenever Emma brought up the idea of wanting to buy a dog, I had to shoot that idea down as quickly as I could. I hated that I couldn't buy or adopt a dog for her, because I saw how badly she wanted to own one. And as someone who grew up around dogs, they are a great addition to any family. With that being said, the issue of getting a dog for Emma had been a major one in our family. It was the main root of many fights between Jen and I lately. She had been taking her daughter's side and making me seem like the bad guy for no reason. Instead of telling our daughter the reality, which was that we couldn't afford to have a dog, Jen would tell her to pressure me into buying one and that we could figure out the finances later on. So, in my daughter's eyes, I was the only reason why we couldn't get a dog. I was standing between her and her one and only wish. One time, as we were sitting at the dinner table, Emma brought up the topic again. She told us that when she stayed over at her best friend's house, she spent most of the time playing with her dog and taking care of it. She assured me that she could totally do it if I got her one of her own. Instead of restating the fact that nothing had changed and that we still couldn't afford to get a dog, my wife looked at her daughter before telling her that we would get it, but on one condition. Emma had to get better grades at school, and that then we would think about it. Emma was over the moon when she heard her mom tell her that it was possible to get a dog. There was a lot of hugging and squealing from Emma as she expressed how excited she was, and she promised her that she would spend all of her time studying to get better grades. I was sitting in complete silence, looking at my wife as if she had grown a second head. I couldn't believe that she just told our daughter that we would buy a dog. This situation would end one of two ways. I would either have to be the one who broke her heart by telling her that we, in fact, still couldn't get a dog for her. Or two, we would buy a dog just like she wanted, but we would end up knee-deep in debt as a result. Both options are pretty devastating to all of us. Had Jen just not made a promise to Emma that she couldn't keep, had everything been fine. I knew that Jen wanted the best for our daughter, and it wasn't like I didn't want that as well for her. I wanted to make Emma happy, there was nothing that I wanted more. However, we had to be realistic here. So, after Emma's excitement had died down, I sat down with her to tell her that buying or adopting a dog wasn't just about the money. I told her all these stories of my dogs and how much time and effort they took for me and my siblings. I explained to her that if we do get a dog, she would have to walk it every day, clean after it, take it to the vet, play with it, train it, etc. A dog would bring this whole set of responsibilities that my wife and I couldn't afford. Emma, still believing that we would buy her a dog if she got good grades, told me that she had done her research and that she was ready for one. She told me that she was going to walk it every day and take care of it. She assured me that with the help of Jen, the two of them would be able to handle it. My heart broke knowing that I would have to break my own daughter's heart, but I just couldn't do it. So, instead of telling her that I wouldn't get a dog for her, I just hoped that I would be able to delay buying it long enough that she would forget about it, and perhaps move on to something else. Unluckily for me, although I was expecting it, Emma never moved on from that idea. As a matter of fact, she worked extra hard to better her grades. She studied day and night, motivated by the idea of owning a dog. Despite endless fights and arguments about this topic, my wife was encouraging her and keeping the idea alive. I honestly didn't know why she was doing that, because there was no way we would be getting a dog. Not wanting to upset my daughter, I played along. One weekend, Emma woke up excitedly and told me she couldn't wait for us to go to the dog shelter. I was pretty confused, so I went over to my wife and asked her what was going on. As it turned out, she had promised Emma to visit the dog shelter during the weekend to look at dogs, to entertain the idea of getting a dog. I asked Jen why she would do that without talking to me first, and my wife informed me that I was such a Debbie Downer that I would have shot down the idea. So, instead, the two of them decided to ask me to take them to the dog shelter on the day off, to prevent me from saying no. Jan and I had a full-blown fight that morning because she was making plans with my daughter behind my back. Whenever I brought up that eventually, we were going to have to break our daughter's heart by telling her that we wouldn't get a dog for her, my wife would tell me that we would get to that when the time came. When I stated that the idea of going to the dog shelter was a terrible one, and that we should instead go out for ice cream or anything that would distract Emma from the idea of getting a dog, Jen insisted on going to the shelter. So that's what happened. Even though I was completely against the idea, I took Emma to the dog shelter with my wife. You can probably already tell where this story is going, because Emma ended up falling in love with all the puppies there. My daughter got teary-eyed as she played with the Labrador puppies, happy to be in their presence. It warmed my heart to see her this happy. I could tell that the tears in her eyes were happy ones. However, I also knew what would happen if we decided to get a puppy for her, as I've raised many puppies in my life. And let me tell you, it ain't easy. Anyway, my daughter spent almost an hour being around the dogs at the shelter playing with them. Perhaps she would see the amount of time and effort that the dogs require and maybe that would change her mind, right? That couldn't have been far from the truth. When we got back home from the shelter, Emma and Jen kept nagging me to pay the shelter another visit and actually get a dog the next time. Even though Emma was just 10 years old at the time, I asked her to bring a pen and paper to write down how much it would cost to adopt and take care of a dog. After rounding it up together, we realized that we would need several $1,000s per year in order to take care of it, thousands of dollars that we didn't have. We barely had enough to make it through each day to begin with. I told Emma that if realistically we were to get a dog, we would have to give up a lot of things in order to take care of it. We would have to cut a lot of corners. I informed her that we would have to stop shopping from malls and we would shop from thrift stores instead. We would also budget our food and snacks, and we would never be able to afford going on a vacation. And for me, that wasn't worth it. I also explained to her that having a puppy meant a lot of work. It would mean that she would have to walk it around the neighborhood, sometimes several times a day. Emma was too young to do it on her own, and she would probably have to wait for one of us in order to go on that trip. I worked long shifts and I wasn't going to walk the dog after a long grueling shift. Emma would also have to play with it and tire it out. I knew from experience that dogs can get pretty destructive when they are not well trained and exercised, so she would have to spend a lot of time playing with it. Every time I mentioned one of the many cons of owning a dog when you can't afford to, Emma would assure me that she could handle it. When I would straight up tell her that it wouldn't be possible for her to do it on her own, Jen would chime in and tell me that she would take care of it. When I got tired of having to convince them that this wasn't the right time to buy a dog, I told them to put that idea on pause until further notice, that I would rethink it and reconsider the entire situation. I knew for sure that there wasn't any amount of thinking or reconsidering that was going to change my mind about it. The following day, Jen asked me to go to the grocery store to shop for the week. We usually went together, but there were times when we would make that trip solo, so there was nothing out of the ordinary there. Between the driving, the traffic, and the shopping itself, the trip took me a little less than 4 hours. After I got back home, I parked the car in the driveway and started unloading the bags into the mudroom. Neither my wife nor Emma came to help me unload the groceries, which was odd. It wasn't until I heard the little sound of a puppy yelping that I knew something fishy was definitely going on. I beelined to the living room, and lo and behold, there they were. My wife, Jen, and a little ball of energy running circles in front of them. I was speechless. I couldn't say anything at the sight in front of my own eyes. I couldn't believe it. Did they ask me to go to the grocery store just so they could go out and adopt a dog behind my back? Did my wife think that I would be okay with it just because she went through with the adoption? Not to startle Emma, I half whispered and half yelled to my wife that I needed to speak with her. Once we were alone, I asked her what the hell she thought she was doing. We had discussed this matter over and over again, and not once did we agree that we would get a dog. Jen, seeming apologetic, told me that she could no longer say no to Emma. She told me that Emma had been saving all the money she could just so she could pay for the adoption fee. Jen reassured me that we would find a way to take care of it, but that we can't take it back to the shelter and break Emma's heart in the process. I asked Jen how she managed to adopt one so quickly, and it turned out that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. Jen had been researching shelters and looking at dogs behind my back for the past week. When I asked her how she planned to pay for all the extra costs that this dog was going to bring, Jen just shrugged her shoulders. I was furious. The strain that this puppy was going to put on us, both financially and mentally, was going to be huge. I told Jen that a huge decision like this had to be a mutual one. We both had to agree on it. She did me wrong by making this decision on her own, completely overlooking my opinion. And now, because of her, I was going to make a decision that would make my daughter hate me forever. I had to take the dog back to the shelter. When I informed Emma of that decision, my daughter told me that if I were to take the puppy back to the shelter, that she would never speak to me again. And she sounded so serious and hurt that I couldn't bring myself to go through with that decision. So, I asked Jen about our next step, questioning her about the supplies that she brought for the puppy. Jen pointed at 3 large bags of dog food and that was it. She didn't buy a bed for the puppy, a leash, chew toys, treats. She didn't buy anything. This poor dog wasn't going to receive adequate care because my wife wasn't prepared for this type of responsibility. I didn't have the means nor the energy to take care of the puppy at the moment, but the reality of the matter was, I had to figure something out. So, with all the money that I had saved for our emergency savings fund, I took Emma to a pet store to buy all the necessities. Emma was bubbling with excitement as she picked a collar, a leash, a kennel, some chew toys, treats, and an affordable bed for the puppy. When we got back home from the pet store, I gave Emma some instructions on when to feed the dog, how to walk it, and things like that. I even sent her a couple of YouTube videos that would help her. Then, I asked Jen to join me in the kitchen to talk to her privately. When we were alone, I told her that all of this was on her. I informed her that she would be the one walking the dog with Emma on a daily basis, and that she would have to keep up with the vet bills and the vaccinations. I told her about all of the things we would be cutting out as a result, and that we would have to live a frugal life from now on. Jen seemed too proud to say that she made the wrong decision, and she just nodded at my instructions. In the first few weeks, Jan and Emma took really good care of the new puppy. But, as the excitement died down, they both realized that having a puppy wasn't all fun and games. Bailey, the puppy, had to be potty trained, and this dog turned out to be one of the most stubborn dogs I had ever seen. So, my wife and daughter spent endless hours running after it so that it wouldn't poop on our carpets. There was also the sleeping issue. Bailey refused to sleep at night. So, we would hear her barking and yelping several times a night until Jen woke up to comfort her. Bailey was also quite the eater. She went through bags of dog food like they were nothing. All of these issues started to accumulate, and even though Jen would never admit it, I could tell that she regretted making the decision to adopt Bailey. It reached a point where we were all sleep deprived and miserable, so I eventually had to talk to Emma and tell her that this couldn't go on any longer. I explained to her that it wouldn't be fair for Bailey to not give her the life that she deserved. Having been too overwhelmed with everything that went on these past few weeks, Emma didn't object when I told her that I would be taking Bailey back to the shelter. Maybe one day in the future we would be able to adopt a dog and give it the best life we could, but that day isn't now.